The NPA in Limpopo has taken a decision not to prosecute anyone in relation to the Phala Phala case. The National Prosecuting Authority, spokesperson Mthunzi Mhaga joins me live now. Good evening, Mthunzi. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Fundo, and good evening to your listeners and viewers, and thanks for having us.
No, it's a pleasure to have you with us. You know, when we saw the story, I just quickly remembered what the former Chief Justice Mogoeng had said, and cautioning against the decision to prematurely take to court cases that are not ripe for hearing, because he stated that that clogs the court roll. What went wrong here?
Nothing went wrong. We carried on business as usual, in the sense that you will recall that Mr. Atta Fraser, the then DG of State Security, had laid or registered a criminal complaint in Rosebank against the president. And that then was followed with a comprehensive investigation by the Directorate for Priority Crimes Investigation Unit that is called the Hawks, DPCI. Some of the allegations were that the conduct of the president and one Major General
Wale
Rude amounted to money laundering and corruption. Part of the investigation also covered the possible contravention of the Income Tax Act and the Exchange Control Regulation of 1962. Now, after carefully assessing the evidence and evaluating and interrogating the more than 100 statements that were in that police docket, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Ivy Tenga in Limpopo, came to a conclusion that based on all evidence considered, there are no prospects of a successful prosecution. So even if you were to prefer any charges, it wouldn't sustain, say.
And this pertains to just the President and Major General Wale Rude, because currently there is, of course, the theft case for the three suspects, Froliana Joseph, her sibling, as well as Emmanuel David. That specific matter continues, so what exactly does this all mean?
So there needs to be a distinction between the housebreaking and theft, which is before the courts currently in respect of the three accused persons.
Yes.
This one related to the four possible contraventions. One that deals with money laundering, corruption, which would be your Prevention of Organized Crime Act, your Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, that is PRECA. That would be your Income Tax Act. It would be your Exchange Control Regulations of 1962. So the statements that were obtained were in order to test those charges with the evidence that was available. And therefore then the Director of Public Prosecutions had an engagement with his prosecutors who thoroughly examined that which was placed before them and came to a conclusion that there is no relevant and admissible evidence that could sustain those charges. Remember
there was
that
quite a lot placed before them, because remember the Public Protector also conducted her own investigation, and a report, at least insofar as it relates to Major General Wale Rude, had found that he acted improperly, at the very least, in deciding to conduct an investigation all on his own pertaining to this matter, instead of reporting it.
Well, once again, we need to distinguish between the mandate of the Public Protector and that of the prosecuting authority, because even though the value chain gives each component a responsibility to investigate, but we were not conflated in any way in how we approached it, because remember, we were approaching it from a criminal point of view, which could not unfortunately present before the prosecutors any sufficient evidence that could sustain any possible charges, which is what informed the decision of the Director of Public Prosecutions. And remember, Mfunda, that the prosecution policy of the NPA, when you take a decision to prosecute, you consider the strength of the state's case. You look at the possible defenses of the accused. You look at the admissibility of the evidence and reliability thereof, and the possible credibility of those witnesses that would have been lined up in terms of statements that would be contained in the police docket. Then you come to a conclusion: is there a case to proceed with? And in this instance, the Director of Public Prosecution came to a conclusion after careful examination of that evidence that it could not be in any way successful in prosecuting anyone.
This case was one that gripped the nation, of course, because it was a theft at a president's house, the first citizen, but also because of the period we found ourselves at the time. because of the fact that this is now revealed to society after the fact. It's happened and only brought to society through Arthur Fraser after the fact. In this instance, when we look at Mr. Hassim Mustafa, he was an individual that it seemed as though there was no clarity as to whether he had followed all legislation insofar as being tax compliant. So with him, he had stated that he had a certificate, specifically also in relation to the money, because the foreign currency that came into the country, it seemed that there couldn't be some sort of clarity as to whether he actually had the right documentation to have the foreign currency in the country. What is the status there?
Remember that the SARS had conducted an investigation that relates to tax-related issues.
Yes.
But we also looked at that aspect insofar as the persons of interest in relation to the statements that had been presented to the prosecution. And they couldn't find any evidence that could sustain any charge in contravention of the Income Tax Act.
But there was most certainly a question mark, or you were satisfied with whatever information came to the fore insofar as Mr. Hassim Mustafa is concerned?
We were satisfied that in respect of persons of interest, those mentioned in the statements, there is no contravention of the Income Tax Act.
All right. And then so now this matter is closed, or it's possibly that for now you will not proceed, and perhaps at a later stage, if more evidence comes to the fore, then it could be reopened?
What is important is the fact that at the moment, based on a careful examination of the evidence that was available, a decision was taken by the DPP not to proceed with the prosecution.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mhaga, for joining us and giving us clarity on that matter. That is National Spokesperson of the NPA, Mthunzi Mhaga, speaking to us on that breaking story that the Limpopo NPA has decided not to prosecute any individual insofar as Phala Phala is concerned.